Hi, and welcome back to Biblical Theology, Exegesis, and Hermeneutics, where meaning is always context-driven. I'm your host, John Strazicich, and today we'll be embarking into the Old Testament. Okay, so we'll be looking here at the Divrei Amos, that is the words of Amos. And this is an exegetical study in the prophecy, poetry, and politics of the prophet Amos. And once again, this is biblical theology, exegesis, and hermeneutics, where meaning is always context-driven. And that is a very good, little slogan there to remember. Meaning is always context-driven. And that's where you're always going to find the correct connotation of how a word should be understood is by the context in which it is situated. All right, then coming then here to the book of Amos, the superscription lets us know that his prophecies began during the reigns of Uzziah, king of Judah, and Jeroboam the second, king of Israel. And we're going to say that this his prophetic activity was probably somewhere between 765 and 750 BC. Now that's all just approximate. You can't be hard and fast. But as we know that the within the superscription, it does give us a secondary dating for the prophecy, which was 2 years before the earthquake. So until we gain a little more information on that particular earthquake from, supposedly maybe from more epigraphic materials of discovery from the ancient world, we're kind of a little bit, in the dark. But there is some light here. According to the archaeologist Yigael Yadin, he was in charge of the dig at Hazor, and according to Yigael Yadin, he puts the earthquake that had leveled the stratum 6 at Hazor to about 760 BC, and that would fall in line with the earthquake here that is mentioned in the superscription. And also we know it from Zechariah chapter 14, I believe verse 5 mentions also the same earthquake as in retrospect. So this was a very, very powerful earthquake that was remembered throughout the history of Israel, and so we're beginning to understand through archaeology, through various digs, that there was an earthquake that leveled some of these stratum in the stratigraphy of these digs of these cities here in Judea, and in what we would call Israel, during the 8th century. And so and also we have Aaron Meir, another archaeologist, I think from Bar Ilan, and he also, at his digs at Tel Asafi, which is Gath, he also can see that there was an earthquake there in one of his levels that he also, would attribute to about 760 in agreement here with Yigael Yadin. So that's important for us to note. So we're getting a little more comfortable here, understanding, exactly when, and an approximate date when the prophecy of Amos came. So it was 2 years before that earthquake. So 765 is a good time in which to temporarily for the moment say that it was around this time when Amos was sent by Yahweh to Israel to prophesy. And this also, when we look at the politics, because we're looking at Amos, the politics, the poetry and prophecy of Amos. We can see here that it's during the divided kingdom, and this is the apex of the divided kingdom. Remember, at the time of Solomon, the kingdom enjoyed its greatest strength ever. During the time of David and Solomon, and then, at the death of Solomon, then the kingdom split between Rehoboam to the south and Jeroboam the first, son of Nebat, to the north. And ever since then, the northern kings, they did not want their population to worship Yahweh in Jerusalem, because then they would lose. They were afraid of losing, the stability of their countries, and the hearts of their countrymen would go to the south. So they built, he built, a worship center in Bethel and Dan. And that's what Jeroboam, son of Nebat, did, and all the kings that followed him kept this. And then in the north, during the Omride dynasty of King Omri, followed by Ahab, and so on, this dynasty introduced Baal worship, and it was the prophets, Elijah and Elisha, who commanded Jehu to go in and genocide the lineage of Ahab and Jezebel. And so they, according to the prophetic word that issued ultimately from them, Jehu went and he fulfilled the words of the prophets, that the whole lineage of the Omride dynasty should be eliminated, and to eliminate Baal worship from Israel. And so Jehu did, and as a result, then he was told that, to the fourth generation, after you, you're going to have sons sitting upon the throne, because you obeyed, the word of Yahweh in eliminating Baal worship. And so and so he did, and you can find that whole story there, back in the book of Kings. And so what happened, though, was that Jehu still kept the altars of Bethel and Dan, and it was just a corruption of Yahweh worship, and that continued uninterrupted all the way until the northern Israel was completely removed in 722 BC. But at this time, during the 8th century, in the first half of the 8th century, Israel and Judah experienced they regained the territory that David and Solomon once enjoyed, but it wasn't a united kingdom, and so this is where this is the politics here of the time of Amos, and along with Amos here in the 8th century. A lot of people like to just start with, Amos as the first of the writing prophets. But we have Jonah here from Gath Hepher, and he came before Amos, but people like to place the book of Amos before that, probably because the the book of Jonah is a biographical account, and therefore they want to place Amos slightly before that in time. Now we were going to say that Jonah lived, would be senior to Amos, but whether in how his book came to us, it may have been a little bit later than how the book of Amos came to us, because since it's biographical in nature. But there's a lot of conjecture in that. But I'm just telling you how when you start, studying the minor prophets, you're going to see that people like to place Amos first. But anyhow, but he's definitely comes in time before Hosea, and Hosea is placed first within the minor prophets simply because of its length. But what Amos does have in common with Hosea is that he's also prophesying not to the Judeans, but to the kingdom of Israel. He was sent, but he is a Judahite. He is sent from Tekoa, this town here on the ridge of the mountains of Israel, overlooking towards the Dead Sea. God sent him from there, from being a sheep breeder, and sent him to prophesy against the altars of Bethel and Samaria, and so forth. And so when you look at the minor prophets, you have Micah is at this same time with Hosea and Isaiah. But and they're prophets of the south of Judah, and Amos and Hosea are prophesying in Israel to the north, as well as Jonah at this time. And I'm just saying these are the probably the first of the writing prophets of the 8th century, and this is important for you to know. But the politics, that occurred during this century, Israel and Judah were able to expand their borders because the internal strife that was occurring in the Assyrian Empire. They had, they were struggling just with their own internal problems, which enabled, Judah and Israel to, to experience great prosperity. And that's what happened. And this was even in accordance, according to, we have 2 Kings 14:25 was that, Jonah from Gath Hefer, he had prophesied that that the Lord would expand the borders of Israel from Lebo Hamath all the way to the Dead Sea, and for Judah all the way down here to Elath. So this incorporated the prosperity of the country and its aggrandizement. So at the height, at the very pinnacle of this time, is when God sent Amos then to prophesy against the altars. And basically the main theme of the book of Amos is the destruction, the prophesied destruction of the Bethel temple cult. That is these cult centers within Israel. Because remember, God, said that they were to worship at the one place that God had placed his name. So that we know that, from the time, of David, that, and then Solomon, that God placed, the temple in Jerusalem, and it was forever to be there. And so any other temples that would have been, Yahweh would have been worshipped at would be a corruption of Judaism. And so, the book of Amos is, when you look at the very end of the book of Amos, well, the prophetic oracle is that God would raise up the the fallen booth of David, and raise it up with a future Davidic monarch. Well, then so then the whole book of Amos is about the destruction of the temple cult at Bethel and the coming new Davidic Messiah that will unite both Judah and Israel under one kingdom and one king, with its worship being in Zion and Jerusalem. And this is in accordance with the motto of the book of Amos. So it's very important. Verse 2 is the motto statement for the book of Amos, that Yahweh roars from Zion and lifts up his voice from Jerusalem. And then we can see the effects of that the pastures of the shepherds mourn, and the top of Carmel withers, and so that motto is very important, and it shows that Yahweh's residence is in Zion and in Jerusalem. So this this is very if you were in the north, this becomes a very political statement that he makes. So this is definitely religio-political jargon here of the prophet Amos, and in accordance with definitely with Yahweh, or we should maybe say Yehovah in place of Yahweh. Beginning to it be an adherent of understanding that the name Yahweh is better. We're better off going back to Yehovah. And so that's I'm looking in. I'm kind of turning that way, and it does seem to be the proper way in which to pronounce the Tetragrammaton, Yehovah. Okay, now then coming here, approaching the macro structural analysis of the book of Amos. There is specifically 5 units that are distinct within the book of Amos, and you'll see that most scholars would group here, just to make it easy, the superscription and the motto of the book of Amos into one unit, but substantively, generically, especially genre-wise, they are completely different. The superscription of verse 1 is entirely to be understood on its own footing. It's the editorial work, placing the time of Amos within a place and time, and it does so quite well. And during the reigns of Uzziah and Jeroboam II, which is the height. Remember, these kings were at the height of affluence, in accordance with the prophecy of Jonah that God was going to increase the territory of Judah and Israel back to the same size it was during the reign of Solomon. And they enjoyed that because God determined that, no, I'm not going to allow, Israel to be, to be destroyed at this time. He gave them an extension of life, and that obviously went all the way into 722 BC. And when they were, when the Assyrians, deported them. And so we should look at the book of Amos. Definitely, the rise of the Assyrian Empire came with Tiglath-Pileser III in about 745. He starts, shifting his weight around and reviving the Assyrian kingdom to the level of empire. And then the succeeding kings took it all the way to Egypt, and so the Assyrian might came with the rise of Tiglath-Pileser III. But before that, the kingdom of Assyria was fraught with internal strife, and it allowed the time of Uzziah and Jeroboam II to aggrandize their kingdoms and enjoy this period of prosperity. And that's where Amos is situated. But when we look at the book, we have the superscription in verse 1, which gives the date of the reigns of the kings, and then that interesting verse at the end of verse 1 where it says that he prophesied 2 years before the earthquake. And I'm just following most scholars with Yigal Yadin that this earthquake occurred somewhere around 760, according to his dating of stratum 6 at his archaeological dig at Hazor, and then Aaron Mayer, he also is an archaeologist, and he's going to with his dig there at Tel Asafi Gath, he's going to agree there with Yigal Yadin's understanding of that somewhere that earthquake was somewhere plus or minus 760. Okay. And so all that is recorded for us, in the first verse, that came from the people most likely who were the editorialists who put Amos's prophecy, into the canon, and that's how we find these superscriptions. That's my understanding of the book. But the motto, verse 2, is completely separate, totally, completely different. This is just the motto of the book, and it's definitely political from the get, because Yahweh is roaring as a lion from Zion, and lifting up his voice from Jerusalem. And so Amos was called to go prophesy against the altar at Bethel, and so obviously Amos, from the point of view, he's a southerner, he's a Judahite, going to the north to prophesy against them. So they would, he's definitely a Yahweh partisan, for sure, and of course, because that's the truth. We're all partisans of Yahweh, and he has chosen for his lair to be at Mount Zion in Jerusalem. That's where his temple is at, and for Amos at his time. And so the motto is separate by itself. And then you look here at 1:3 to 2:16. So basically, the rest of the chapter 1 all the way to the end of chapter 2 is the oracles against the nations, the 8 oracles. And then the largest block of Amos's prophetic speeches comes in chapters 3 to 6. And this will be divided into 2 major units. But we're just looking at the macro structure. And then lastly here we have Amos's 5 visions concerning the fall of the Bethel temple cult and the rise of a new eschatological Davidic monarch over all Israel. And so really when you come here to the end of the book, you see how the motto of verse 2 is right on the money, because it's Yahweh roaring. Where from? He's from the Jerusalem temple, and so it's it's that the fallen booth of David would be risen up again and reunite the kingdoms. So verse 2 is the motto, is separate all by itself. It's the motto, and so. Besides the superscription, these 4 texts here make up the book of Amos, but with the superscription, that would be the fifth. And you'll see here that in verse 2a alpha, Vayomar here is going to be most likely the voice here of the editor of the superscription, and it introduces "and he said," and then it goes directly into Amos's words that begin that Yahweh roars from Zion, and so Amos's words begin in 2a beta, Yahweh roars from Zion, but the Vayomer or Vayomar of 2a alpha, that's the editor, and it's his this introductory speech reporting formula, and he said, referring to Amos, and then you go into the whole book of Amos. But it's important when you come down here to about 7:10 to 17, we're going to have a biographical account of Amaziah, the cult priest at Bethel, and in his struggle there with Amos, and their dialogue. That's taken up in 7:10 to 17, and this here is then going to be a part of the text that was just like blended right into. It was very, very uniquely done. It came from a different work, so we don't have, we're not privy to the rest of that work. Now, we don't know if this was from Amos as one of his own disciples or who did this, but it seemed to be an actual recurring the actual acts that happened, and whoever recorded this then when Amos's prophecies were written down, then this other account was spliced in here at 7:10 to 17, and that's all written. It's narrative style, and it because all of Amos's preaching was all done poetically, and then it was written down that way. But this comes from a different hand, and so God uses these editors here then to incorporate that. And when all this was done, it's not a big deal. I don't know. I'm just saying that Amos, this was done 2 years before the earthquake, which was quite early. I'm saying somewhere just right around 760, just before that. That's why I was saying more about about 765, whatever. It could be somewhere that range, but it could also plus or minus from the 760 date. It can vary, and that's how I'm understanding the book in its macro structure. We'll be looking at all the different micro structural units within each of these sections. And we'll be intently looking, at between the poetic seams of one unit of thought as it comes, and we'll itemize that as we move along. Okay, so we finally make it to the text, and so we'll be looking at the two first major units of the book. Number one, the superscription found in verse 1. And the motto of the book of Amos found in verse 2. And we began down here with the Hebrew text, Divrei Amos asher haya vanokdim mit tekoa asher chaza al Yisrael bimei Uzziah Melech Yehuda uvimei Yarovam ben Yoash Melech Yisrael Shenatayim lifnei haraash Vayomar Yehovah mitzion Yishag umirushalayim Yitain kolo ve'avelu neot haroim ve'yavesh rosh hakarmel. Okay, so this translates into English as the words of Amos, who was amongst the sheep breeders from Tekoa, which he saw concerning Israel in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, son of Joash, king of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake. And then we have Vayomar, probably not Vayomer, probably because of the Shalshalet here. And then, so the very first word stemming here from the very mouth of Amos is going to be the tetragrammaton, which I am trying to get into the habit of saying Yehovah, just simply because I just I was trained and educated at some of the finest schools in America, and of course I was taught to pronounce this as Yahweh, but there's I don't know if I'm going to get into it now, but there's good reasons to begin to doubt this. I mean, Yahweh is never ever recorded in any Hebrew manuscript. It's never ever written out, and there's reasons for that stem from Josephus and Second Temple Judaism. We'll see this in Josephus and also the Septuagint. You can see it in the Septuagint. But there's very good reasons for maintaining the old pronunciation Yehovah, and so I will be sticking with that, unless I need to revise that. But at this time, that's how I'm seeing it. So to come here to the motto in verse 2, it starts off Vayomar. And this functions here as an introductory speech report formula that introduces the prophecy of Amos. So the very first word Amos utters is the divine name. So if I'm permitted to say Yehovah, that is the very first word of the prophecy of Amos. And it is a huge, massive theology as well in the book of Amos, in these hymnic refrains, and Yahweh is his name, or see, there I go. It just comes out because that's the way I was trained. Yehovah is his name. This is the theology proper in the book of Amos is very, very important. So the divine name is paramount, and so we're going to just follow the pointing of Yehovah. So it begins with Yehovah Mitzion Yeshak. Jehovah roars from Zion, and that would be the line A, and then line B here, U Mirushalayim Yitain Kolo, and from Jerusalem he lifts up his voice. And as a result, in the second distic, in this this quaternary here that we have of these 4 lines, forming two distichs, then as a consequence, ve'avelu ne'ot haroim, line A, and the pastures of the shepherds mourn, ve'yavesh rosh haKarmel, and the top of Carmel withers. Okay, so this makes up, coming to our book and looking at the very first words along with the superscription, and there's actually quite a bit here to get into, and we're going to look at all this. Note here that it begins with divrei Amos. So this is, and I also believe that the book of Jeremiah begins this way, divrei Yirmiyahu. The words of Jeremiah, and then we have this relative clause that follows, and Amos, we should say, Amos. His name means a burden or a burden bearer. So understanding, the words of the burden bearer. So he brought a burden definitely to Samaria and to Bethel, and he unloaded it. And that's the prophecy. It's the burden. It's the burden that Yahweh put upon him to prophesy. So if Yahweh speaks, who can help but prophesy? And so he's unloading this burden of this prophetic word that God placed upon him. So he can't shut up his mouth. He has, he's got this fire burning within him, as Jeremiah would say, and so he's speaking it forth and unloading this burden of Yahweh upon primarily onto Israel, to call them to repentance if possible, to return to the true Yahweh worship in Jerusalem, and to abandon the temple of Bethel, and Gilgal and Dan and wherever else they created other worship sites, and so this is what the word Amos means in Hebrew, burden or burden bearer, and these are the words of Amos the burden bearer, and it says that his occupation was who was amongst the Van Nokedim, amongst the the sheep breeders from Tekoa, which he saw concerning Israel. So we see now that the focus of his prophetic words are towards Israel, towards the north. And then we have these regnal dates of his prophetic activity in the days of Uzziah, Melech Yehuda, and in the days of Jeroboam. This would be Jeroboam II, not son of Nebat, which would be Jeroboam the first, but the son of Joash, Melech Yisrael Shenatayim, 2 years before the earthquake. Okay, so when we come up here and look at the superscription, we have the title, that is the words of Amos, Divrei Amos, okay, and then it gives a little bit about Amos's background, nothing about his paternal background. It mentions his vocation and place of origin. He's a herdsman from Tekoa, and then the prophetic visions of Israel and their chronological notations of activity. So his primary addressees is which he saw visions concerning Israel, and then we have the regnal dates of his prophetic activity in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah, and Jeroboam of Israel, and here are their respective dates in which they reigned. And then we have this notable chronological date of prophetic activity. It was an earthquake, and it was 2 years before that earthquake that he spoke his prophetic words. So there's a lot of information here in the superscription, and I would take it that the superscription doesn't come from the prophet himself, but comes from the people who would have been responsible for collecting the prophetic works, putting them into the canon, and then placing them in time and place. And so I that's how I would understand the superscription here taking place. And then they have their own, chronological notation 2 years before the earthquake. And then in the motto here, we have, it begins here with Vayomar, with the oscillate here, denoting that this is a speech report formula. And he said, referring to Amos, and Amos, basically, and what they want you to understand is, and Amos said, and now it goes into quoted speech. So now the people that created the superscription also created the very first word of verse 2a alpha here, Vayomar. Okay, and then that leads in then a quoted speech that goes through, all the way, I guess, till what is it? Chapter. It might be chapter 8, 10 to 17, or chapter 9, 10, 17. When we have that interlude, that will be an important point. So, I just want to call this here to your attention that, these superscriptions, just like fly through them. When you sit back and look at them, there's a lot of information here that, that you can glean from this, because God thought it important to when these prophetic words were collected, to place them in a time and place. Okay, so to put a little more flesh on the time and place here, he was prophesying in the days of Uzziah and Jeroboam, and this is Jeroboam the second. Okay, and these are their dates here, according to a certain chronology that I follow, and you may see different dates for these kings. They vary somewhat, but I'm following this dating system here. And you'll remember that Jehu, who I'd mentioned previously, he was commanded by means of from stemming from Elijah and Elisha to go, and that he was to wipe out the lineage of the Omride dynasty with Ahab and Jezebel. And so when he did fulfill that word that he was commanded, he was promised that the his descendants for 4 generations after him would sit upon the throne. And so when we come to Jeroboam the second here, he's the third. Zechariah is the fourth, but he only reigns for like 6 months. After this, it's just, Shalom comes in and, kills Zechariah, and then that guy gets killed, within, I think, a month. So, these kings were getting butchered right and left. So you could see that, the stability here when Amos came in, that the kingdom, everything looked great, and there was, it didn't look like nothing was falling apart, and Amos prophesied and all this stuff, and people probably thought he was a kook, and they were all partying, having a great time. Then the earthquake hit, and then when Jeroboam died and Zechariah came, it just went downhill very quick all the way to 722. So the quickly, I would definitely say that Amos's words were were collected, but especially by the time you get to Hezekiah, they're already in book form, because the north went into captivity in 722. And notice that when let me go back to the text. Let me go back there. Okay, before we get to the text, this is just a slide here that I made, concerning, the kings of Judah, kings of Israel, and the prophets. This may be of some use to you, but let's get back to the text. Okay, what I wanted to do here was to note that Amos here is from the south. He's from Tekoa, so he's a Judahite. And the words of Amos, which he saw concerning Israel. So he's from the south, and in a series of visions, he receives these words, and they are primarily leveled against Israel. Okay, and notice this: Bimei Uzziah. Okay, in the days of Uzziah, and remember his other throne name is Azariah. And you'll see both names, used within Kings itself, and Chronicles. But we have Uzziah, okay, and remember, the Judahite king is named first. This is important. And then this is first, and then second is in the days of Yarovam ben Yoash Melech Yisrael. So even though his prophecies are, against the north, you would think that it would be in the days of Yarovam, right, ben Yoash Melech Yisrael. That would be named first. But remember that the people who created the superscriptions, these are all Judahites. Remember that at this time, Israel, they're gone. They're in captivity. They're gone. So they're not the purveyors of conservatism within Judaism. It's those who worship Yehovah, and so this is the reason why in these superscriptions the same thing happens in the book of Hosea. Even though Hosea, is himself from the north. It begins, with in the days of Uzziah, in the days of Uzziah, that comes first. That the kings of Judah come first, then the kings of Israel, because the people who created the superscription were Judahites. So of course, the Judean kings are going to come first. Because they are the only, they are the legitimate ones, and they're the last man standing, so to speak. Okay, so then we have, then the second. So we have these regnal date formulas, and then we have this special chronological notation 2 years before the earthquake. Now, what we need to do here is also note the Septuagint, okay, and there's some very different readings here when we come here. To this in the Septuagint, we have the words of Amos, which came, and then we'll have to put in something like auto here, to him in Nakarim out of Tekoa, which he saw concerning Jerusalem. See, remember the Hebrew text down here says, which he saw concerning Israel. Okay, so this Amos, the LXX author is saying that the words are not directed to the north, but to Jerusalem. And then and then it continues in the days of Uzziah king of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam son of Joash king of Israel, 2 years before the seismic event, the earthquake. So this is there. So what he's doing here is that when we have Divrei Amos Asher Haya Vanokedim, right? So he's reading Vanokedim as Vanokedrim, okay? So he's changing here the holum here that we have, for an A class vowel, whether it's patak or kamates, and then the dalet he's turning into a resh. And this is why we have n here is going to be the inseparable preposition here. In our text, it's with the patak. But the inseparable preposition be, usually, begins with a shwa. The Septuagint is reading it is in Nakarim. So this is some type of locality within the city of Tekoa. So in the Nakarim of the environs of Tekoa, which he saw concerning Jerusalem. So this is a very different read, and it's to be taken lightly, and we're firm in the Masoretic reading of the text, but it's important to note here that the Septuagint varies here quite a bit, and there's a little bit here even when we come to the motto. And he said, and then we have kurios. Remember the Septuagint LXX for the Tetragrammaton inserts the word kurios, supposedly from Adonai. The vowels of Adonai are put in underneath, Yehovah. That's the explanation that's put forth. And I just don't follow the whole scheme. I understand it, and they definitely they're following this schema, which I recognize. It makes sense, but it doesn't. When you get back to what is the divine name, it does make sense that we follow the pronunciation of Yehovah, and we'll get into that later. But notice here that for phthegomai, that the choice of verb here is not roar. The Septuagint is, and the Lord utters from Zion, and from Jerusalem he gives his voice, or presents his voice, or grants his voice. And now the rest follows pretty good, and the pastures of the shepherds mourn, and the summit of Carmel has become withered. So that nicely follows the Hebrew text, but the choice for Yish'og going with phthegomai, that does seem to be a little odd for a translation, and we may say more about this when we come to the third chapter. But there's some other things here I want to get into next to explain how we'll proceed with the poetry of the book of Amos. Okay, now coming here then to looking at the prophetic speech of Amos. Remember that verse 2 here began with Vayomar, and he said, with the with the little shalshalet there, to distinguish it as a hard, as a major stop there, to separate it from the actual words of Amos. So Amos's words began here, and notice that all of Amos here is all going to be quoted speech throughout the whole text of Amos, except when we come to 7:10 to 17. This is where we have this insertion. of this other biographical account that came from one of his associates, Amos's associates, where the work of Amos was actually recorded by somebody, maybe one of his disciples, somebody we don't know, but obviously that material was apprehended here when the prophecy of Amos was incorporated into the book as we have it now, whereas actual speeches, all these prophetic oracles that were given publicly, are now then put in book form and then made presentable, within the canon, with the added superscription, but a part of the text of Amos, some editorial activity had taken place, where we had this insertion here of the dialogue between Amaziah, the priest of Bethel, and Amos, where Amos had prophesied, concerning the temple at Bethel, and Amaziah, the priest, was trying to excommunicate him from Bethel, from prophesying there. And so all this is recorded, and part of it is recorded here and placed right within the prophecy. So all of Amos, all his words are all in poetic, distichs. And only this part here of 7:10 to 17 is biographical. So it hits you when you're reading it in Hebrew. You go, oh wow, we have a different genre here. We have a biography now. So all of a sudden the 7 to 10, the language is written in your Bibles, going from side to side, filling the whole thing. Whereas the poetic seams are all the distichs are all sectioned off. You can see that in your modern printed English editions of the Bible. But anyhow, what I developed my understanding of the fundamental operating principles of biblical Hebrew poetry some time ago. That's the very first presentation that I made on my site. So it might be good for some of you who don't really have a lot of knowledge about Hebrew poetry. You may want to go back and look at that particular slide that I made way back when, and look at that, because I do go over Hebrew poetry quite extensively in that slide, and it would be worth your time if you want to gain some other further knowledge. But my understanding here is I came to this conclusion: the basic fundamental operating principles of biblical Hebrew poetry can be accurately characterized as distinct modes of discourse. Okay, so we'll just stop there. They are distinct modes of discourse. So these can be, prophetic speeches of various types, words of salvation, words of judgments. They could be, like in David's speeches, it could be an elegy over the death of Saul. These can be lyric poetry, as in the Psalms. There's all different types of poetic genres for poetry, and in the motto here, this specific origin, we would say, is a theophany. This comes from the language of a theophany, the motto here. So we would understand that that this particular this mode of discourse here stems from the genre, poetic genre of theophany, and there's some good reasons for that. You may want to see, look at some of the other commentaries that are out there. And you'll see that that I'm not the only one saying this, but distinctive modes of discourse are going to then look at the different type of literary genres that can occur within Hebrew poetry. Okay, so then these modes of discourse are communicated and developed by means of discrete units of linearized rhythmical thoughts. That's very important. Linearized, discrete lines of rhythmical thought. Okay, so notice here that we have Yehovah Mitzion Yeshag, and then we're going to have this kesura here, this pause. Okay, represented by the Zot Cave Katon. Okay. Then we have another statement. Okay, U Mirushalayim Yeten Kolo. So when you look at these two lines, let's look at the discrete units of linearized rhythmical thoughts. Yahweh or Yehovah roars from Zion, and from Jerusalem he lifts up his voice. So you can see that these are thought rhymes here, okay, following semantic principles here. Yahweh roars from Zion, and from Jerusalem he lifts up his voice. So you have Zion and you have Jerusalem that are united together. So we have the religious sanctuary of the temple. This is the language of Mitzion, and then Mirushalayim is then going to be the city of David, Jerusalem, which is going to encapsulate the political headship. So Yahweh is speaking from the temple and from the Davidic monarch, the Davidic monarch of the Davidics, and this is where he lifts up his voice. So we have roar and lift up his voice. So these are. So now to go back, just look at this again. You have to go over this. This is how Hebrew poetry is going to proceed. It's some type of a distinct mode of poetic discourse. Okay, so we define this one here as stemming from the language of theophany, which are communicated and developed by discrete units. So this is very short. Very, you're not going to use many words. It's only a very few choice words. So you can see here that we've got three, words or prosodic words here being used in each distic here. Okay, and so it's very discrete. So they're chosen. They're carefully chosen. And so we have Zion and Jerusalem, and we have roar and lifting up the voice. Okay, these are all discrete units, and they come in a linearized rhythmical thought. So there's a little thought here. Yahweh roars from Zion. Okay, there's a thought. Okay. And he lifts up his voice from Jerusalem. There's the second thought. So you can see that these are thought rhymes. The language is going to come in little chunks of thought, enough for you to understand. So when you hear line A, we're going to say Yehovah Mitzion Yeshag. Okay, so what you hear in line A, then the reader's tentative. He's being very tentative. Okay, so what was said there? How is he going to, complement this, or concretize this? Somehow finish this thought, and then he says Mirushalayim Yeten Kolo. So now we understand. Okay, so now, the author is coming at establishing Zion and Jerusalem. So remember that he saw the prophecy was concerning Israel to the north. So the motto is stemming that. Wait a second. The theological authority stems not from the altar at Bethel, not these worship centers in the north, but solely from where Yahweh chose Zion and Jerusalem in the south. So the motto statement's full of theology, and it's completely, it's very powerful, and you can just read right over this, and you wouldn't ever. You have to sit on this stuff, and when you start thinking about the whole book, it becomes crystal clear once you come to the end of chapter 9, when then he has this last oracle of salvation where Yehovah is going to re-erect the fallen booth of David, and there's going to be this Davidic monarch, and then basically it ends with millennial, the what we would understand as the New Testament's version of the millennium. And so then you look back at the whole book and you understand, oh, okay, so this is the motto, and it's all about the demise of the Bethel temple cult that are centered in the worship centers of the north that Jeroboam, son of Nebat, had set up, and that Yahweh's roaring against the false worship, and that the legitimacy, salvation is of the Jews. That's what Jesus told the Samaritan woman, right? So salvation is of the Jews, and is from the south, is from Jerusalem. And so this is you have to understand this. So it's the fall and rise, it's the fall of Samaria and the rise of the new Davidic monarch that's going to come, which, as we understand, is Christ. And then when we look then at when Yahweh roars and lifts up his voice, well, then what happens? Well, there's a cause and effect. Well, when in these theophanies, when Yahweh comes, the mountains melt, right? When he speaks, then the pastures of these shepherds mourn, and the top of Carmel withers. So we can see here that this second, now when you come back, it's linearized rhythmical thoughts in discrete units. Okay, so we've got a three here again. All right, so you've basically got a 3-3. You got three words, three prosodic words here in line A. We got 3 here again, same as what we had up here in the first distick, and so Carmel here. We there is a Carmel, that was known from, remember the story about David and Nabal, and that whole story. Well, that there was a Carmel there, that's mentioned in that story there. But this here, most scholars are pretty comfortable placing this with the promontory point, that's above the plain of Akko, that's in Israel to the north, where the the struggle between Elijah and the prophets of Baal took place, up there on the mountain, and so it says that the top of Carmel withers, the pastures of the shepherds mourn. So these would be the low-lying places. In the morning would have to do with, obviously, the roar of Yahweh, his displeasure, And the pastures of the shepherds could be, could be anywhere in either Judah or Israel. And then, but we have a specific place here, the top of Carmel, which is a very high elevation, over 1,000 feet high. Jutting straight up, right as a cliff on, out of the ocean. And so the top of that withers, and it was well watered. So this is how it starts, and we need to, begin to analyze Hebrew poetry and pay attention to its contours. So once again, Hebrew poetry can be characterized as distinct modes of discourse which are communicated and developed by means of discrete units of linearized rhythmical thoughts that trade in and oscillate between accentual, syntactic, and semantic principles. And that is how I came to my understanding of just the basic operating principles of how it works. Now there's more to say about it. We'll probably have more to say about that next time as we get into the works of Amos. Okay, this has been another session of biblical theology, exegesis, and hermeneutics, where meaning is always context-driven. I've been your host, John Strazicich, and we will continue on in this fascinating series here that we're going to develop in the book of Amos.